It happened on an unusually warm afternoon in Charleston, at one of those coffee places that tries too hard to look casual. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs, pour-over coffee served in glass flasks. Melissa had picked it. She loved these places. We were seated near the window, sun cutting through the glass and pooling on the reclaimed wood table. She and Kayla had just gotten up to use the restroom, giggling over something Kayla had said, and I was left alone, stirring the melting ice in my tea with a wooden straw, half listening to the lo-fi jazz playing through hidden speakers. That's when I noticed him. He'd probably been inside the whole time, but I hadn't seen him until he was standing right next to me. Mid-60s, maybe older, but his posture was military straight. His gray suit looked custom, subtle pinstripes, probably wool, expensive but quiet. He didn't say hello, didn't smile, just leaned in, placed a small navy blue velvet box on the table in front of me with a careful hand, and in a low voice said 5 words that made every hair on my neck stand up. "You'll need this tonight, Brian." Then he turned and walked away. Not in a hurry, not suspicious. Just disappeared into the stream of people near the sidewalk like he'd never been there. I sat frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The box was small, fit neatly in the center of my palm. Velvet, yes, but faded in places like it had been handled many times. No markings, no note, no explanation. I looked around the cafe, hoping for a clue. A smirk, a hidden camera, someone watching me. Nothing, just a hum of conversation. The clang of dishes, someone's baby fussing in the corner. It didn't feel like a joke. It didn't feel like anything I could explain. My first instinct was to open it. My second instinct told me not to. Instead, I reached down, unzipped my work bag, and slid the box inside between my laptop and a folder of documents I was supposed to review before Monday. When Melissa and Kayla returned a minute later, I was still staring at the spot where the box had been. Melissa didn't notice anything off at first. She picked up her iced latte and asked if I'd paid yet. Kayla was tapping on her phone, scrolling through something with that restless energy only teenagers seem to have. I forced a smile, nodded, and said, "Yeah, just about to." I pulled out my wallet, paid the check, all the while feeling like someone was watching me, like the moment was still stretched open, waiting for something else to happen. On the drive home, I couldn't focus. I kept hearing the man's voice in my head. Not threatening, not frantic. Calm, absolute, like he knew something I didn't. I glanced in the rearview mirror more than usual, half expecting to see that gray suit a few cars back. But there was nothing, just Charleston traffic, brick buildings, people walking dogs. At home, I brought my bag inside and waited until I was alone to take the box out. Melissa and Kayla went upstairs, Melissa calling out something about laundry, Kayla disappearing into her room with a don't come in kind of energy. I went into my office, shut the door, and sat down at my desk. The box was heavier than I remembered. Still no markings. The velvet was worn at the corners, one side slightly indented. Like someone had gripped it hard, I stared at it for a few minutes, my mind spinning through every possible scenario. Was this a warning? A threat? A message? What was inside changed everything. But that's not the part of the story you need yet. Melissa and I had been married for just 4 months, and in that brief time, life had taken on a rhythm that almost fooled me into believing everything was finally falling into place. After years of loneliness, therapy sessions, awkward dating apps, and the bitter aftertaste of a divorce that had left more scars than I admitted, I'd started to breathe again. Melissa was unlike anyone I'd ever met. Graceful, poised, the kind of woman who could command a room without raising her voice. She worked in medical sales and made it look effortless. She could slip into conversations about surgical implants and market analytics with the same ease she used to talk about wine pairings or vintage furniture. She had this laugh, low and genuine, that made people lean in when they heard it. I love that sound. It made everything feel like it was going to be okay. Kayla had been a tougher win. 15 is never an easy age, especially when you're dealing with the aftershocks of a blended family. But lately, something had shifted. She wasn't cold. Not exactly. More cautious, like she was waiting to see if I was really going to stick around. I didn't blame her. I knew what her life had looked like before, with her father walking out when she was still in elementary school, leaving her and Melissa to rebuild on their own. For a long time, Kayla met every one of my attempts with a polite practice wall. But in the past few weeks, there had been cracks. She started asking me things, small things, like if I could drive her practice or how to fix the Bluetooth in her car. She even laughed at one of my lame dad jokes last week. That was a win. The lunch had been Melissa's idea. Kayla had made varsity cheer. She was one of only 3 sophomores to do it. and Melissa had insisted we celebrate. So there we were, back at that cafe with the reclaimed wood and the overpriced kombucha on tap, seated at a sunlit table like we were any other happy family. Melissa was glowing, talking about how proud she was, her hand occasionally brushing mine on the table, a sparkle in her eyes that made me feel like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Kayla was playing with her straw wrapper, pretending not to be thrilled, but unable to hide the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I watched them both, trying to absorb the moment, to memorize the ease of it all. But underneath that surface, underneath the smiles and light conversation and the soft clink of iced coffee glasses, something was wrong. That box, that small navy velvet box, sitting in the side pocket of my work bag, like a lead weight. I hadn't taken it out again since slipping it in during lunch, but it hadn't left my thoughts for a second. It was just sitting there, silent and ominous, as if the mere presence of it had shifted the air around me. Every time Melissa laughed or Kayla spoke, I felt this widening gap between what they saw in me and what I was feeling. They saw calm, normal, steady inside. I felt like a man sitting on a fault line. Melissa leaned over at one point and touched my arm. "You're quiet today," she said, smiling. "Everything okay?" I nodded quickly, smiled back. "Just tired. Long week." She kissed my cheek, and Kayla rolled her eyes, but even that had a softness to it, a kind of acceptance that hadn't been there a month ago. I wanted so badly to stay in that moment, to just pretend the man in the gray suit hadn't existed, that the box was nothing more than a mistake or some bizarre coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the moment I opened it, the life I had finally started building, the life that had seemed so solid, was going to crack wide open. I didn't go back to the house with Melissa and Kayla. I told them I had to stop by my old apartment to grab some paperwork I'd forgotten, which wasn't even a lie, just not the whole truth. That apartment was a place I kept as a safety net after the wedding, a quiet one-bedroom downtown that still smelled faintly like dust and old coffee, a reminder of who I'd been before everything started looking so perfect. The moment I closed the door behind me, the silence felt heavy, like the walls were listening. I dropped my work bag on the kitchen counter and just stood there for a second, staring at it, my pulse loud in my ears. I took the velvet box out slowly, half expecting it to feel different now that I was alone. It didn't. Same worn fabric, same subtle weight. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one I'd eaten countless lonely dinners at, and opened it again, this time forcing myself to really look at what was inside. A black flash drive, completely unmarked. A tiny silver key, old-fashioned, the kind you don't see much anymore. And a folded piece of paper, thick cream-colored, the edges perfectly aligned as if it had been handled with care. I unfolded the note first. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was elegant, deliberate, every letter shaped with patience and control, nothing rushed or sloppy about it. This wasn't a scribble. This was someone who wanted to be understood. The first line alone made my stomach drop. My name was written there, followed by a signature I recognized instantly, even though I'd only seen it once before on a framed photo Melissa kept in a box in the closet. Daniel King, her ex-husband, the one she told me had died in a boating accident 3 years ago. The note was calm, almost apologetic in tone, which somehow made it worse. He said he wasn't dead. He said disappearing had been the only way to survive. He wrote that Melissa had tried to kill him, just like she had with the men before him, and that the reason I'd never met any of them was because none of them were still alive. He said accidents leave fewer questions than divorces, especially when the grieving widow looks convincing enough. My hand started shaking as I read on, my mind scrambling to reject every word while my gut told me not to. Near the bottom of the page, the handwriting tightened slightly, as if the writer had pressed harder out of urgency. He warned me that patterns repeat themselves and that I was already inside one. According to him, I had 6 hours before I became the next tragic story people would shake their heads over. A fall, a fire, a medical emergency no one would question. The key, he explained, belonged to a storage unit less than 10 minutes from my apartment. Everything I needed to understand the truth was there, including proof he knew I'd demand before believing something this insane. I sat there for a long time after finishing the note, staring at the words until they blurred together. Melissa's laugh replayed in my head. Kayla's smile, the warmth of that lunch, the normalcy of it all. None of it matched what I just read. And yet the precision of the warning, the way that man at the cafe had known my name, made denial feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. I grabbed my keys, pocketed the tiny silver one, and left the apartment without turning on a single light, driving straight toward the storage facility with the note burning in my mind and the clock already ticking. The storage facility sat behind a row of shuttered warehouses, the kind of place no one went unless they had a reason to. And as I punched in the unit number with shaking fingers, I remember thinking how absurd it was that my life had narrowed down to this concrete hallway and a steel door. The key slid into the lock smoothly, like it had been used recently, and when I rolled the door up, the smell of dust and cold metal hit me first. Inside, everything was meticulously organized, not stacked like junk but arranged like evidence. Shelving units lined the walls, each labeled in neat black marker, folders color-coded, electronics wrapped carefully in anti-static bags. Daniel hadn't thrown this together in a panic. This was years of work. I started with a laptop already open on a folding table, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. Surveillance footage filled the desktop. I clicked one at random and felt my stomach twist. It was Melissa, unmistakably her, leaving a house late at night in 2009, her face calm, her movements unhurried, time-stamped hours before the fire that supposedly killed her first husband. Another video showed her on a staircase in 2014, just behind a man I recognized from an old photo she once dismissed as ancient history. The footage cut just before his fall, but the angle, the proximity, the timing, it was enough. These weren't coincidences. They were rehearsals. I moved to the documents next, my hands numb as I flipped through insurance policies, death certificates, police reports. $2 million in payouts, spread across two men whose deaths had been ruled tragic but unremarkable. A house fire blamed on faulty wiring. A stairfall chalked up alcohol and bad luck. Melissa had cried at the funerals, given statements filled with grief and shock, and walked away wealthier each time. No one had looked twice because she didn't give them a reason to. Then I found the psychiatric records, copies Daniel had somehow obtained, and those were harder to read than the crime scene photos. Diagnoses I barely understood, but words I couldn't ignore, antisocial traits, pathological lying, lack of empathy, history of violent ideation, notes about manipulation, about how she presented as charming and composed while minimizing or reframing acts that would horrify anyone else. A doctor's handwritten comment at the bottom of one page stuck with me the most, saying she was highly intelligent and extremely dangerous when her control was threatened. Finally, I found Daniel's section. Photos of his car, brake lines cleanly sliced, damage so precise it couldn't be explained away as wear or accident. Statements he'd written, detailing how he'd pieced it together too late, how playing dead had been the only way to survive her. As I stood there, surrounded by proof, the last fragments of denial collapsed. I wasn't married to a successful, loving woman who'd had bad luck in the past. I was married to someone capable of calculating murder, of waiting patiently, of turning intimacy into a weapon. And according to the note, I was an exception. I was next. By the time I left the storage unit, the sun was already low in the sky, bleeding orange across the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should have. My hands were still trembling as I drove, one eye constantly flicking to the rear-view mirror, even though I knew Melissa wasn't following me. Not yet. My mind replayed every smile she'd ever given me, every kiss, every tender moment we'd shared, now reframed through the sickening lens of what I'd just discovered. She had killed before, planned it, executed it, mourned publicly, and collected checks like prizes. And tonight, she had a dinner planned, just like she had with the others before things went wrong. I parked a block away from the house to gather myself and go over everything one more time. Daniel had been right. He'd told me the pattern always ended the same way. Dinner, wine, a carefully timed excuse to head down the basement, and a fall that would look like an accident, just like it had in 2014. Except this time, I wasn't walking in blind. My shirt, a simple button-down, had a small pinhole camera tucked just above the pocket, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Under my collar, a tiny microphone was clipped and wired to a recorder tucked inside my sock. My phone, set to silent, had an alert running in the background, a safety app that would auto-dial 911 and transmit my location unless I canceled it manually every 15 minutes. Daniel had spent nearly an hour walking me to the plan over the phone from a burner number, his voice clinical and precise, stripped of any warmth. He was calm, like a man who practiced this 100 times in his head. He told me what to say, how to behave, how to resist the urge to accuse her too early. If she felt cornered, she might deviate from her routine. I had to let her believe everything was still under her control, that I was just a loving husband coming home for dinner. At exactly 6:30, I walked up the driveway, past the flowers Kayla had helped plant last spring, through the white front door Melissa insisted we paint cream, because it looked more inviting. The scent of garlic and rosemary drifted through the air, warm and familiar, and for a split second, I almost forgot what I was walking into. She greeted me at the door in one of those soft cashmere sweaters she wore when she wanted to seem effortlessly elegant. Her hair pulled back, her makeup subtle. She smiled like everything in the world was perfect. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, kissing me on the cheek. Kayla was already at the table, thumbing through her phone, but smiling when she looked up. "Hey, Brian." I waved back, trying not to look like my heart was trying to escape my chest. I felt the weight of the camera against my chest, the low buzz of the recorder humming in my thoughts. I couldn't show it. I had to be normal. I had to survive this. Melissa moved through the evening like a stage actress, hitting her marks. Every gesture, every laugh, every glance timed with precision. The table was set perfectly. Candles lit, cloth napkins folded, wine already breathing in a decanter. Kayla sat across from me, chatting about school and cheer practice, completely unaware of the tension building beneath the surface. Melissa poured wine, served the food, smiled as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong, and then, like clockwork, she made her move. She stood, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and said casually, "Brian, would you mind grabbing the good red from the basement? It's on the second shelf near the back." My heart pounded so hard it felt like my shirt would shake from it. I met her eyes and smiled gently, replying, "No need. This one's fine." I lifted my glass slightly. Her smile didn't falter, but something shifted, a flicker behind the eyes. "Come on, just grab it. It's better for the steak." "I'm good, really," I said, keeping my tone light. "Besides, I don't want to miss this conversation," I added, nodding toward Kayla. For a split second, she just stood there, dish towel still in hand, her eyes sharp and assessing. Then the smile came back, colder this time, like a mask being adjusted. "All right," she said softly, almost amused, as she returned to her seat. Dinner resumed, but the temperature in the room had dropped. Melissa's cheerfulness became slightly more forced, her eyes tracking every movement I made. I played my part, listening, nodding, laughing when Kayla told a story about a clumsy mascot falling off the bleachers. I waited for the perfect moment. After dessert, with Kayla still at the table, I put down my fork and said calmly, "Melissa, I know about Daniel." The room froze. Her fork hovered midair. Kayla looked between us, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. I kept my eyes on Melissa. "I know he's not dead. I know about the fire, the stair fall, the brake lines. I know everything." Melissa didn't blink. She placed her fork down slowly, adjusted her posture, and tilted her head. Her lips parted into a smile, but her eyes were cold. I was wondering how long it would take. Kayla gasped, "What is he talking about?" Melissa ignored her daughter entirely. She turned her full attention to me, her voice steady and eerily calm. "You really think you're special? That you were different? You weren't. You were just next." I didn't interrupt. I let the recorder capture everything. The way her tone dropped, the way her voice hardened. I burned the first one. I watched from across the street while the fire trucks arrived. She said, almost proud. "The second? Oh, that was art. He never saw it coming. Just one push." Kayla stared at her mother, pale, unmoving. I had Daniel, but he was smarter than he looked. "Pity?" Melissa turned to Kayla with a smirk. "You were always so helpful, darling. So photogenic. People love a grieving daughter. You help sell every tear." Kayla stood up, horrified. "You're insane." Melissa chuckled. "No, sweetie, I'm prepared. Men die. Women move on. That's life." I said nothing. I didn't have to. The camera and microphone captured every word, every confession, every boast. And she didn't stop, not until the front door burst open 20 minutes later. While Melissa continued to speak, boast, about the lives she had ended, about how easily she had manipulated detectives, neighbors, even grief counselors, I felt the vibration in my pocket that meant the silent alert had triggered. The call to 911 had gone through. My phone preset on speaker, connected just beneath the table, and I slid my hand down casually, tapping the line open with a practiced movement as Melissa leaned in across the table, smiling like we were sharing a private joke. The moment the dispatcher answered, I spoke clearly, my voice even. "This is Brian Carter. I have a live confession from a serial killer. The suspect is Melissa King, and she has admitted to multiple murders. We are at 417 West Hollow Avenue. I am wearing a recording device." She's confessed on tape. Melissa blinked, her mouth still half open from her last sentence, and then the mask shattered, her expression twisted, eyebrows knitting, lips curling back with disbelief and rage as she realized what had just happened. She lunged across the table with shocking speed, knocking over a wine glass, the stem shattering on the hardwood floor. She reached for my phone, for anything she could grab, but Kayla was already moving. Her chair clattered to the ground as she jumped in front of her mother, tears streaming down her face, arms out, her voice cracking as she screamed. "No! Stop it! What are you doing?" Melissa tried to push past her, snarling under her breath, but Kayla held firm, trembling as she dug her heels in, her whole body between us. "You're not hurting him too," she sobbed, voice barely holding together. "You're done." I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off Melissa, as I pressed my hand flat against the table to keep steady. Outside, faint at first, then rapidly growing louder, the sound of sirens pierced the evening silence. Blue and red lights washed over the walls, flashing through the front windows like a storm had landed right in the living room. Tires screeched on pavement. Doors slammed. Radios crackled. Melissa turned toward the window, panic replacing her fury. She backed away from Kayla, her chest heaving as if the oxygen in the room had turned toxic. "This is a setup," she hissed. "You planned this. You think you're clever? You have no idea who you're messing with." The front door burst open a second later, splintering the tension that had held the room hostage. Officers poured in, guns drawn, shouting commands. Melissa froze for a heartbeat, then turned and tried to run. She made it 3 steps before being tackled by 2 officers and dragged to the floor, screaming that she was being framed, her voice rising into something raw and jagged. "He tricked me. He manipulated me. This is a lie. They're all lies." They cuffed her as she kicked and cursed, her hair wild, her sweater twisted, her words slurring into nonsense. Kayla collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands shaking as I rushed to her side. I held her shoulders, grounded her, kept telling her it was over, that she was safe, that she didn't have to protect anyone anymore. Outside, Daniel stood just beyond a line of squad cars, arms crossed, watching with the expression of a man who had been waiting years for justice to arrive. The police gathered the recordings, collected the flash drive, bagged the psychiatric records and insurance documents from the storage unit Daniel had unlocked for them hours earlier. The pieces fit too perfectly, the story too detailed. Her voice had confessed to everything. Melissa was still yelling when they closed the cruiser door, her screams muffled as it drove away into the night, taking with it the woman I had once thought I would grow old beside. In the weeks that followed Melissa's arrest, the truth unfolded like a map soaked in gasoline, wide, ugly, and ready to burn. Investigators dug deeper and found layers beneath what we already knew, pieces that connected to people no one had ever linked to her before. Her name, Melissa King, was only one in a long string of aliases. Her real name, buried in sealed college records and decades-old financial databases, was Melissa Jean Carpenter. With that name came a horrifying legacy. Roommates who died under suspicious circumstances, ex-boyfriends who vanished after camping trips, and 2 professors from her university years who had suffered what were originally ruled as tragic but unrelated accidents. Each of them, in some form, had ties to her past, romantic, professional, or personal, and each of them had ended up buried beneath a pile of paperwork too scattered to raise alarm at the time. It became clear that Melissa hadn't just started killing after her first marriage. She had been rehearsing long before that. She had learned how to blend in, how to adapt, how to become exactly what each man needed her to be until they trusted her completely. Then she'd erase them. Each time she changed her name, it was surgical. New documents, clean credit history, forged references, and just enough charm to get through any scrutiny. Her background checks had always come back clean, because she knew how to bury what needed to stay hidden. And now, finally, it was all coming out. Kayla was placed under court protection and moved in with Daniel. The reunion was heartbreaking to witness. She had spent years believing her father was dead, only to find out he had been in hiding to survive her mother. Their first embrace was wordless, just silence, sobbing, and the weight of too many lost years pressing into each other's shoulders. Kayla didn't speak much in those first few days. She stayed wrapped in herself, trembling when doors slammed too hard or when voices rose unexpectedly. But she was safe. For the first time in years, she was truly safe. As for me, I couldn't stay in Charleston. The city I had once called home felt hollow, tainted by the memory of what I nearly became. I sold my business, packed what little I cared to keep, and left the rest behind. I moved west, far enough that the streets didn't look familiar, and the air didn't smell like the same lies. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, Not because I fear Melissa anymore, but because I needed the silence. I needed to live somewhere that didn't remember her face or my name. Sleep doesn't come easily. Some nights, I still wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I can hear her voice in the dark, telling me dinner's ready, asking me to grab the wine from the basement. The sound of heels on hardwood makes my pulse spike. Trust is harder now, too. I flinch at kindness. I study smiles for cracks. I don't date. I don't invite people in. But I survived. And I survived because I listened. That stranger in the gray suit, Daniel, risked everything. He didn't just save himself. He came back, knowing exactly how dangerous she was. Because he couldn't live with what might happen to the next man. To me. To his daughter. He handed me a box in a cafe and trusted I'd take the first step. And I did. Melissa's story didn't end in a quiet tragedy or a faked accident like she wanted. It ended in a living room full of wine glasses and lies, her own voice sealing her fate. She fell not because someone pushed her, but because her ego told her she couldn't be caught. Her pride made her speak too freely. And that, in the end, was what stopped her. Not fire, not a fall, not sabotage, but her own words caught on tape and played back in a courtroom. She's behind bars now, facing multiple life sentences. And the world, even if it doesn't know it, is safer.